Stop being that nice Japanese American girl and come out with your power. Those words offered to me when I was just a few years out of law school by my mentor, Herb, spoke directly to my heart, and I chose a path that I'm still walking today. A few weeks later, I sat on a panel at Minority Law Day, and a fellow Asian American lawyer said, "When I do my hiring, I don't see race or gender. I make my decisions based solely on their legal qualifications." In front of a room full of people, I turned to him and said, "That's bullshit." When people see me, they don't see a lawyer. They see an Asian. They see a woman, but not a lawyer. Even when I'm in the courthouse, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase, I've been misidentified as the judge's clerk, as the legal secretary, even the defendant, but never a lawyer. Heeding Herb's heartfelt advice and making self-honoring choices about my power has not been easy. I'm a US-born, Asian American woman who's felt the pain of anti-Asian racism and discrimination that comes from being marginalized and seen as forever foreign, exotic erotic, the model minority. I was raised on a farm in Boring, Oregon. My grandfathers immigrated from Japan. My grandmothers came as picture brides because US immigration laws prohibited them from coming in any other way. They and their US-born second-generation Nisei children, my parents, were incarcerated during World War II by the US government, their government, based on a lie that the Japanese race was an enemy race, and therefore they were either traitors or spies or forever foreign. My parents rarely talked about those dark years and what they learned from that bitter experience. Shigata ganai, they would say. It can't be helped. Move on. My mother made it clear on how I should behave. Why can't you be more like those nice Japanese American girls? She would ask. I don't know. After high school, I wanted to go to college, but my parents couldn't afford tuition. So I applied for a ton of scholarships, one of which required an interview. So there I was, sitting in a chair, facing two older white men who came from an organization whose membership was all and only white men. One of them asked me, "What do you think about the Black Student Union members at Oregon State who walked off campus in support of Fred Milton, a Black athlete?" I needed that scholarship, and I had a pretty good idea of what they wanted to hear. I sat there silent, willing myself to say that I disagreed with the Black students, but I couldn't force myself to say it. So instead, I talked about why they were protesting, why it was so important, and how challenging it is to be one of few minority students at Oregon State. I was not awarded that scholarship. I was a valedictorian, and at a high school graduation, instead of giving the traditional thank you to the teachers for a wonderful education, I physically turned the podium to face my fellow students and said, "It's up to us to take this little box of knowledge that we got from high school and do something. Go out, experience the world, change the world. We can do this. We must do this." The next day, my favorite teacher stopped me in the hall. "That was the worst valedictorian speech I've ever heard," he said. "You have to wait until you're in a position of power before you give advice like that." "If I don't state my beliefs now and ask questions," I responded, "I'll never remember what they are when I get there." I was a college student at Vassar, and in the summer, I had a waitressing job at a resort in upstate New York. We got paid by the number of people that sat at our tables. Only problem was the number of people that sat at our tables was determined by the maitre d', who would seat 12 people at one table and 2 at another. We felt that was unfair, so we were going to go on strike. But before we did that, we had one last conversation with the maitre d', and he made the situation abundantly clear. "You have no labor laws protecting you. We could fire all of you tomorrow and get a new crew in. And besides, our board of directors is made up of 11 lawyers from New York City. I'd never even met a lawyer. But if they were that powerful, I decided then and there I would go to law school, become a lawyer, and fight for social justice." We didn't strike, but I didn't stay either. I chose to quit, even though I needed the money. I did take that message and learning with me. I graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School and practiced at Legal Aid, representing tenants who were being evicted. I worked at the Urban Indian Council, where I defended people accused of crimes. And then I started a private practice. And it was there that I got to know the Minoru Yasui case that had first started in 1942 and came to me almost 40 years later. In 1942, Congress passed a law, a curfew law, imposing upon all persons of Japanese ancestry, forbidding them from going out of their homes from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. 70% of those folks were U.S. citizens. Minoru Yasui, 25 years old at the time, had graduated from the University of Oregon Law School and was the first Japanese American member of the Oregon State Bar. He intentionally chose to break the curfew law. He walked the streets of Portland and got himself arrested, believing the courts would vindicate his rights as a United States citizen. Instead, he spent 9 months in solitary confinement in the Multnomah County Jail as his case wended its way to the United States Supreme Court, where he lost. The court said that the curfew was constitutional because it was based on military necessity. 40 years later, documents were found in the National Archives that showed that the decision for the curfew and the incarceration of Japanese Americans was based on race and not military necessity. It also revealed that government attorneys intentionally chose to withhold this critical evidence from the United States Supreme Court. With these documents, Yasui called me and said, "Can you arrange a meeting with Asian American lawyers in Portland to talk about reopening my case?" I was thrilled. After all, Yasui was born in Hood River. He was an Oregonian. He was a native son. And his case could prove that 120,000 Japanese Americans, my family, our community, was unconstitutionally incarcerated based on racial discrimination. I walked into that meeting really excited and was surprised by the response. Some of the Asian American lawyers doubted the validity of the documents that had been found in the National Archives. Others questioned whether we had enough evidence to reopen the case. And still others questioned whether we could win even if the case was reopened. I walked out of there mad, angry, upset, and embarrassed for my generation. And I turned to men and said, no matter what anyone else does, I would be honored to work on your case. Fighting for justice in a case like yours is exactly why I went to law school. It was while working on the Yasui case that I sat on that panel and shocked the room by my bullshit remark. And it just so happened that Derek Bell, the dean of the University of Oregon Law School, was the keynote speaker. He came up to me at a break and said, "Gee, it sounds like you'd like to teach law." "Hell no," I said. "That was the most archaic educational system I've ever been in. It's the last bastion of white male privilege." I was giving up being that nice Japanese American girl. Several months later, I received a letter from Derek, and he asked me to apply for an assistant dean position that was open at the law school. No other leader in Oregon had given me such an opportunity. Instead, a federal judge had once said to me, "Come back and talk to me when you're a real lawyer, not one at legal aid." And the United States Attorney and the governor of Oregon, on 2 separate occasions, had said, "You're not a real minority because you're an Oriental." Derek Bell was a national leader of color. He'd worked with Thurgood Marshall to bring desegregation cases. He was the first Black tenured professor of Harvard Law School. He's the godfather of critical race theory. And he was the first Black law dean of a mainly white public law school in the history of legal education. I would be honored and proud to work with him. So I applied, and I was thrilled to be offered the position. But I had different priorities. I had become the lead attorney on the Yasui versus United States case. And if I couldn't bring that case with me, I would decline this incredible job offer. Derek understood. Bring your case, bring yourself, come to Eugene. And so I did, and I spent several years working with him. Stepping forward, speaking out, advocating for justice with his full support and confidence. Today, I'm a consultant, and my focus is on leadership, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I had a potential client, a white male senior leader, say to me, "Peggy, I understand that diversity is a social issue, but I don't see it as a business issue. We manufacture products. It doesn't matter the race of our employees, nor their gender. What matters is that they're qualified for their job. And if you think otherwise, prove it to me." I didn't accept work from that leader. I do have another client, a white male president of a heavy manufacturing company, who said to me, "I want my legacy to be an inclusive workplace where I can encourage my granddaughters to work. I want a diverse workforce that represents the diversity of our community and our country. And I want a place where everyone feels that they belong." I am proud and honored to work with him. After the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others, I no longer choose to use my life's energy to convince so-called leaders about the importance of inclusion and diversity. I choose to work with true leaders who are bending the arc of justice to inclusive workplaces and asserting their leadership in that process. They may not know how, but they have an abiding commitment to why and what. From there, the how will follow. These have been my self-honoring choices. What are yours? Thank you.